Welcome to the Oxygen Advantage podcast with your host, Oxygen Advantage founder Patrick McKeown. With the Oxygen Advantage podcast, we aim to show how functional breathing is an essential part of a healthy and well-balanced lifestyle. Each episode, we meet experts in their field from around the world and talk about their lives, their experiences, and how they learned the importance of breathing. Join us and get inspired. Get the Oxygen Advantage.
Hello, Jack.
Hello, how are you?
Good. I think this is going to be a conversation to take breathing to a new level. I'm always very conscious of people when they think about breathing. They're seeing it's left of field, that it may not be for them. But I'm intrigued with your background. You're a former pro footballer. You're working with elite athletes. You're also trained in Oxygen Advantage, if I can add that.
Of course.
And just a little bit of a background with you. And what we want to do is we want to really use this as a means of thinking about the application of breathing with elite athletes and looking at every aspect of it. So anyway, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me over to Ireland. I've really enjoyed it so far. I've managed to go out and see the countryside on a run yesterday, and yeah, you've made me feel really welcome. And I'm also obviously here going to be sitting on one of the instructor trainings, which I'm really excited about because it will definitely be a great refresher for me, especially in the world that I am in now. So yeah, my name is Jack McMillan. I'm a advanced breathwork instructor through the Oxygen Advantage. I'm also trained in yoga as well. And I work with professional athletes, mainly from my background is football. So I left school at 16, always been in sort of the elite level of sport from a young age. Something that never involved thinking about my breath, of course. It was never something that was taught to me. And then only then when I went on to play professional, I left school at 16 and then was in the elite realm playing senior football. And my background with breathing is quite a funny one because I actually found breath work through pranayama, through yoga first. I remember just hearing that yoga would be good for my mind and body, so I tried it. I literally typed in yoga for men on YouTube and then everything else just spiraled from there. And what I realized when I was doing my yoga qualifications is that the science was probably lacking, and especially to justify it in the world that I'm in now, I needed something like the OA training course to really take it to the next level. And now I run a brand called Optima Performance, where I'm really fortunate enough to work with athletes in mainly football, of course, because that's my background. I've actually worked with over 50 professional football clubs this year, delivering to over 1,200 athletes through the art of breathing for well-being and performance. And the foundation of that, of course, is functional breathing, which is something that has just been missing in the world of sport for a long time. Only now people are starting to catch up and take it seriously, which I can only credit you for, by the way, for bringing it to the field. And now with what I do, it's a blend between well-being and performance. That's where I sit. So yeah, that's a little bit of an intro about me. And yeah, thank you again for having me.
So it's not often, though, that people, if they're an elite athlete and then they do a YouTube search, yoga for men, without going too deep, you obviously felt there was something missing. Was it your state of mind? Was it your body recovery? Was it your sleep?
Great point. I think for me, pre-performance anxiety was the biggest. And I played for a professional football club that at the time didn't have, the resources like teams have got now. So I had to take it upon myself to manage my own mind and body. And I was always quite a curious athlete. I was always open to trying new things. And it was definitely the pre-performance anxiety where I then used to channel my breath more than anything to bring me back to the moment, to try and stay as present as possible, to silence the doubt on each shoulder. So it was definitely that I then seen the effect of. And at the time, basically in football, you do a scholarship from the ages of 16 to 18, and then you sign your professional contracts after that. And there was a time where in my scholarship, mentally, I was all over the place and it was really affecting my performance. And I can definitely say bringing myself back to my present state pre-performance, I wasn't doing anything crazy, by the way. I was literally just concentrating on my breath and trying to regulate it. And that was enough for me to find some sort of balance, which then I definitely think contributed to then me being able to perform earlier in games. A lot of athletes that I deal with now openly admit that it takes them 5 to 10 minutes mentally to get into a game. Football waits for no one. If 5 to 6 players out of 11 are taking 5 to 10 minutes to get into a game because they're not present, they're 1-0 down already. And that's something that I've seen quite a lot in performance and with myself. So I think that was definitely like my first introduction to going, wow, like this can actually, I can feel the effects right now. And that immediate effect was tangible, which definitely in my mind then allowed me to buy into it. And now athletes and clubs are slowly buying into it. So that's I would say my introduction to breathing over time.
So in 2 levels, okay, one, you have your attention on your breath, which is going to help to bring a quietness to the mind. And on the other hand, you're actually actively changing your breathing to induce relaxation, or at least to dampen the stress response. Taking it now into elite sports, what do you see in terms of breathing with the athletes that you're working with? Because very often athletes will say, well, I've got perfect breathing. What do you see? What would be the telltale markers? So in other words, if somebody was listening to this today and you can help just to discuss, we'll tease it out anyway amongst ourselves so they can kind of get a better understanding of what constitutes what you say is functional breathing as the foundation of all breathing.
Yeah, I think firstly, most athletes, so what a lot of my year has been in football has been just foundation of education for athletes, because it's never there, right? I normally just like ask, athletes, is anyone here ever been told how to breathe before? No hands go up. And I'm like, this is why I'm here. So I think on that sense, it's the education of functional breathing and what actually happens when we breathe. No one really knows, like from an athletic standpoint, what happens. And the gas exchange that happens, or how is that affecting their mind and body in the moment. So I think on a really functional, foundational basis, a lot of athletes, unfortunately, because like anything, never been told how to ride a bike before, you're not just going to expect to ride the bike. And unfortunately, it's the same with breathing and retraining patterns and habits, which we know are the foundation for most things. And that is lacking for sure. But I think, and again, we'll probably come on to this in more detail later on, but I think what athletes struggle with is the regulation of their nervous system. And I think that's where allowing them to understand how they can use their breath to get themselves up, which sometimes it's needed to regulate themselves, but also bring themselves down. There's never been education on that until now. So that is something that I definitely feel like athletes buy into when they can feel it.
Yeah, and it makes total sense, because if you think of the pressures that they are under, and even, you left school at 16, you're going into the academy, there's only a small chance actually that you'll make a career out of it.
Yeah.
Everything is sacrificed to get to this point. That's a huge amount of pressure. And if you throw in genetics, if you throw in the trauma or the background of athletes as well, we're all human. They're human, of course. So they will have stresses on their lives, and breathing changes. And isn't it? It's really about that, so very often people feel that I don't need to do anything to my breathing, and it's only if I have a panic attack or a hyperventilation attack, then there's a problem with my breathing. But that's not the case. You've got normal breathing here, you've got hyperventilation attack here, and what we're looking at is this piece in the middle.
Yeah.
You're not breathing normally, you're not having an acute hyperventilation attack, but yet your everyday breathing is holding you back. So we're talking about the respiratory rate, the tidal volume, where you're breathing through, and that all ties into, so you spoke about the nervous system. So this is our body's ability to be able to control not only our state of mind, but our state of stress to induce relaxation if we need to. And there's many examples. We're talking about the biomechanics. We're talking about the top-down communication, the bottom-up communication.
Yeah.
So breathing is a simple tool, though, isn't it? Like, if you think of, I'm kind of curious. So you introduce it, you start talking with the athletes, and you ask them, have you ever been taught how to breathe before? Okay, and that's going to get a good few laughs.
Yeah.
Then where do you start from that?
I think on the awareness piece, I think my biggest buy-in with any client that I've worked with is feeling. It's all right me lecturing them all day on the science of breathing, and athletes don't want that. You know, they want to do. They're doers. That's what they do for a job. They're doers. So the practical application of it is super, super important, and allowing them to feel where they are in a breath hold, what's happening to the body, what's happening to the mind. And just going back to, you were talking about how athletes, their relationship with their own breath. For me, that's probably one of the biggest things that I'm trying to educate people, is that they can change their relationship with their own breath. It doesn't just have to be an alarm system of when they're stressed or tired. We can use it as a tool to optimize mind and body. And that, to me, as long as they start to understand that by feeling on it, I've seen it firsthand with the clients I'm working with, it's changing the game for them. And I think that relationship to the breath only comes through exploration, being comfortable in discomfort, being comfortable in different frame of minds, but also different states.
Okay, can I tease that out a bit?
Of course.
Okay, so we all have a different relationship with breathing, and
Absolutely.
some people have a good relationship and some people don't, and it kind of makes sense, especially if you've had somebody with high stress levels. Very often it's their breathing is impacted. So what you do is you prescribe particular breathing exercises, and you're probably bringing some of it in while they're resting and some while they're doing physical exercise.
Absolutely.
In other words, incorporating it in with what they're already doing.
Yeah.
Some of the exercise that we do and you do are quite strong. You're putting people into an oxygen debt, high carbon dioxide, strong degree of breathlessness, way beyond what they would normally experience. But you're doing it in a controlled dose to have that person, that individual, to be able to train their breathing, not just from a physical point of view, but also from a psychological point of view. So really what we're talking about is, we're talking about a primal fear, which is air hunger. Some of the exercise that you will be doing is you're putting them into that in a controlled dose in order to cause the body then to make adaptations, both from a physical perspective and also then from a psychological perspective.
Yeah, and I think that the psychological perspective I've found the most impactful, really, because that's all they've got in the moment when the pressure's on, when they're in front of goal and they've got to take a penalty, when they're at match point and they've got to serve out the match, whatever sport it is, it's them and their breath in the moment. And from that psychophysiological perspective, being comfortable in those moments, the only way you do it is by training it. It's not leaving them unprepared. It's preparing them through daily practice and breath training. You know, I think the term breath work is probably used in a different way sometimes. It can mean many different things, but I think if we concentrate on sort of the OA techniques and that philosophy, and why it's so effective is it's something that can be applied in life. It's not, I need to do it for 30 minutes on a Thursday at my local studio. This is something that we're doing every day, all day. And I think by doing that, we allow athletes to start to, change their relationship to their own breath, but start to like rewire the habits of the foundation to then, okay, when they are here and we are comfortable with functional breathing, we are changing daily habits, then we can add layers. But without that, I don't want to add these layers because I need this foundation to be right. And that's that's always my approach with the teams and the clubs or the athletes that I work with is we have to get this level right first. And then after that, we can explore.
I often found it probably, you know, when we're conveying breathing and what's involved to, say, an individual who's the first time that they ever came across it or come across it.
Yeah.
And when I want to kind of show, because we talked about dysfunctional breathing versus functional breathing, how might an individual realize that their breathing needs, that there's some room for improvement there? Okay, we could observe the breath. Are they breathing faster than normal? Do they have a natural pause after exhalation? Are they breathing upper chest, or do they have good recruitment of the diaphragm? Are they breathing nose mouth? What's their tidal volume? Do they have irregular breathing patterns? So in other words, are they sighing, or then do they stop breathing? And all of those, so that's our everyday breathing. And I suppose what you're saying is that it's our everyday breathing that's going to influence our breathing during physical exercise.
Yes.
And this makes sense, because if we have poor everyday breathing, it's not going to automatically correct itself during physical exercise.
Yeah. And just to add to that as well, like, I think we both know, like, when athletes are actually in performance, they're not going to be thinking about their breath.
And they don't have to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, but if my athletes are dysfunctional when they're not playing, they're never going to learn, and it's only going to impact them negatively. But if I can get them functional off the pitch and in training, we are breathing low, slow, and deep. It's a 360 breath. We're thinking about the biomechanics. We're thinking about how we're regulating our breath. And I think to allow athletes, to any athlete watching this or listening to this now, I think one of the key things is the awareness of what the breath can do for you on a daily basis. And in times of crisis, or the heart rate spikes, we are nervous or we are stressed, just going through daily life, how is the breath changing with it? And if you were to just do that simple exercise daily, you would then start to realize what correlation a breath has with the types, with your mindset at the time. So I think that has definitely been something that has been like really impactful, is just the mindfulness behind it. Like, just because the breath is the only thing in the present moment. This is what I'm trying to explain to athletes that I'm working with, is you want to understand more about yourself than just watch your breath, because you're present.
And I suppose there's another thing, because people often think about breathing and they're thinking about the air that comes into the body, nose or mouth. And whether it's in through the nose and out through the nose, or in through the nose and out through the mouth, or mouth, depending on the person. We don't always consider, of the air that comes into the body, what's the alveolar ventilation? In other words, if we were to change our breathing pattern, or even just understand that by changing our breathing rate, and even by maybe altering the tidal volume a little bit, we can influence the air that actually gets to the small air sacs in the lungs. So we can influence that. We can also influence the oxygen that transfers from the lungs to the blood. We can also influence the oxygen that transfers from the blood to the working muscles, but also organs, including the heart and brain.
Yeah.
So just even on a physiological basis, when we think about an athlete, and oxygen is the primary source of fuel, nobody seems to consider, can I influence oxygenation? That's huge, and it comes back to, it is about how is the individual breathing in their normal everyday life, but even just a simple mechanism and changing breathing patterns so that you have it then for when you need it. It's really about Optima Performance, isn't it?
Yeah, and I will quote you on this. So I remember on my advanced instructor training, you were explaining it almost like a car engine, with an old car engine to a new one now, and the efficiency of what it's doing with the petrol inside. And this is why, this is one way that I would explain it to an athlete, is like, okay, what is the output? What is your return on investment if you breathe like this? And they're now seeing the direct results in going harder for longer, okay, under control of, yes, their body's going harder for longer, but it's their mind that goes harder for longer. And that's where our decisions are made, and that's where sport is won or lost. It's up here. So I think having that sort of like output being outlined to them helps the buy-in as well. And even like at any level of sport, amateur or professional, or aspiring young professionals, I think it's something that now, like, sport is won or lost in 0.01 of a second, or even less if you look at the 100 meters in Paris final in the Olympics. So I think these marginal gains now are something that athletes are now realizing that they can achieve, not in performance. Most athletes spend, especially in football now, I think I was telling you off air, but the schedules for games now for athletes in football is crazy because of the money, the different cups they're in. And most athletes now, when they're not playing, they're not training, they're recovering. They have more recovery days than they do training days if they're playing 3 to 4 games a week sometimes. So that is where the recovery, they have to take responsibility. It's something that it's a lifestyle choice. So the club can't monitor that full time. Yes, the club will have their recovery protocols, but it's when they're not at the club. That is where they are sleeping well or not, recovering well or not, but also where their mind is and their nervous system at that time. So I think that's definitely something that is becoming a lot more respected in the game. And from just an output perspective of breathing efficiently, I've seen it for myself and the people that I work with. It's just like even like clarity of thought.
So you continuously come back to mindfulness and present moment awareness. And what you mean by that is that it's your ability to hold your attention on what you're doing. Okay. So say, for example, you're in the second half, there's physical fatigue setting in, and then there's going to be mental fatigue.
Yeah.
And then the mind is going to wander.
Absolutely.
Does mind wandering, I have 2 questions. Number 1 is, does mind wandering happen a lot with players? And number 2, can you train the brain without focusing on breathing? I know the answer to number 2, but I'm going to put number 1.
Yeah, I think with the output of players on the pitch, it's. Could you rephrase the question? Sorry.
So say for example on the 70th minute,
Yeah,
and the individual is the physical fatigue is coming in.
Yeah.
You know, the ball is elsewhere, but is it ever tracked in terms of, does that individual, do they have their attention on the game, or has their mind drifted off elsewhere? And you know, then they're kind of there, but they're just going through the motions. Roy Keane, I've often heard say, they just went through the motions. They were there or they didn't show up.
Yeah.
In other words, they're there in body, but they're not there with all of their attention.
And you can tell straight away with a player. And people listening to this, if they watch football, they've probably got their favorite team, their favorite players. They know when their players on it and when they're not. And a lot of it comes back to like their type of flow state that they're in. Obviously, that means different things to different people, of course, but the term like flow state in that moment is where they're probably going to be doing their best work. And players start the game, if they're not in the right headspace pre-performance, that's why they're taking 10 minutes to get into a game. And it's too late. Unfortunately, football will wait for no one. You'll be 1-0 down. And if it was a mistake that you made personally, you'll be looking over your shoulder thinking, am I going to get dragged off the pitch at halftime, right? So I think at any point in the game, this happens. And I think that's why the approach that I have with athletes is I break it up into 3 areas. Pre-performance, during performance, post-performance. They're my 3 areas I work on with most athletes when we're looking at game-specific stuff. And I think the ability to silence your thinking mind pre-performance is it's a world-class skill nowadays, because players are now realizing that they've not got time to not perform from minute 1 or minute 0. So it happens quite a lot in games where you can tell with the players that are not on it. There's so much going on in their mind. You know, I've been there myself where you're on the pitch and you're not present and you're thinking about everything else but the game. And then the back end of the game, the way that our brain's designed, it's telling us not to run. You know, it's telling us to stop, have a break. Don't go and chase that ball down. You're too tired, Jack, etc. Where eventually, yes, you know, the breath does get out of our control. The diaphragm fatigues and tires, and we are just like hanging on for dear life until the final whistle. And it is mainly when we're in that state where naturally our decisions are compromised on the pitch and our decision making goes down in quality because we are fatigued mentally and physically. So I think like you can definitely tell on the pitch where players are, and that's the same in all sports. I'm not just referencing football now. It's the same in single sports, probably even more, because it's just you. There's no hiding. And that's the experience I've had with some of the athletes I'm working with as well. It's even more noticeable in single sports.
And in terms of the breath, so the breath and the mind are so linked, okay? And we were talking about everyday breathing, training that. But every time we have our attention on the breath, we're taking attention out of the mind. We're bringing attention into the body. We're also bringing attention into present moment awareness because we're not stuck in the past or thinking in the future. So we're helping to develop the capacity of the brain to hold attention on one thing. And that's something that needs to be trained as well. Now, we can go one step further because, say, for example, if you have an athlete with dysfunctional breathing, and I remember there was one paper published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, 2022 paper. They looked at 1,933 athletes in Japan, and they assessed their breathing from a biomechanical point of view. So not all three dimensions of breathing, but just the biomechanics. 90% of them. Well, 87.5% of professional athletes had dysfunctional breathing, but overall it was 90%. Now, if you think almost 9 out of 10 athletes with dysfunctional breathing from a biomechanical point of view, and then if we were to look at their breathing, say, from a biochemical point of view, from a psychophysiological point of view, and not to go in too much into the to make it too complicated, but really what we're thinking about, we're talking about a state of mind. I actually think flow state is the most important thing that we can achieve in any walk of life. I think the capacity to be able to direct our attention fully on what we're doing. And we can spend 13, 14 years in formal education and we still do not have a capacity to hold our attention. And what's even more now, there are so many things that are sabotaging attention, especially mobile phones, social media, all the different alerts, WhatsApps, etc., etc. Okay, so coming back full circle, we spoke about training everyday breathing. And with that, in turn, we're also training the brain. And we're bringing this into physical exercise, so it's dynamic.
Yes.
So that was one aspect that we spoke about. We also spoke about then, you talked about the personal relationship that a player has with breathing, bringing in breath holds and putting them into a stress state and getting them to relax into that state so that you can cause adaptations both from a psychological point of view and a physiological point of view. Okay. Can you take me through? So you were talking about pre-match, during the match, and post-match. The kind of things, because number one, the question I'm going to ask you is, can we make breathing accessible? That it's not just one more thing to do?
Yeah.
And kind of describe like a warm-up, and do you bring it into the warm-up or what way, all of that?
Yeah, sure. So, there's quite a lot to unpack there. We're going to be here all day, I'm sure. But yeah, I think just going back to their relationship to it. So we only improve that by training it in doses. So I'm not just going to completely put someone in the deep end because I don't want to lose them after one session with their buy-in, right? So I think, again, for an athlete to understand it, they've got to feel it, but also be in control. Not out of control, but still in control. It's these quick wins. And I think for athletes, attention spans as well, like footballers, I say we because like you say, I can resonate with them. There's a lot of internal, external pressures from life and the media and socials and everything else. So they are under a lot of pressure and their attention spans are compromised when they're constantly in other areas. So I think giving them these moments of switching off, I always ask them after, I'm like, where is your attention in that exercise? And they kind of look at me and go, yeah, it was just here on the breath. I was like, did it feel good? Yeah, it felt amazing. And their mind can empty and they can then just be in that moment. And I think the more we train that, the more they're going to get used to it. It's a brain thing, right? It's a habit thing to allow them to feel and then do. And then that also incorporates into our pre-performance where, yes, after a certain level, depending on some of their testing that we do with them and different, like you say, if we look at their CO2 sensitivity and stuff like that through the Bolt score, we can start to sort of then design what will work for them and what feels comfortable for them to do. So every player is different, but it's giving them almost like a framework, and then they can go into the framework themselves and then design what works for them, as long as it's still in the right guidelines as such. Because I won't just do the same exercise with everyone. And that's why when I work one-to-one with players within a club environment, it's great because we can really get to the nitty-gritty of what they need. Because some players pre-performance, they actually need up-regulating. Some players need down-regulating because they're too high. And I've experienced that myself. I remember like I referenced this when I worked with players. Like I was playing an FA Youth Cup game for Notts County, and I actually got took up at half time. And the 3 rounds before that, I was playing really well. I scored the goals and I was playing centre mid. And in that game in particular, I was just way too high. There was so many people in the crowd like watching, and I was just way too high. I didn't have the regulation to come down at the time. I didn't have the education. And I remember like fouling someone in like the first 5 minutes, got a book in, and then the ref was like, I kept making some fouls, and then the ref was like, next time you make a foul, I'm going to send you off. So the gaffer took me off at half time, and then that's my FA Youth Cup journey over, right? And I think for a lot of players, they either need to come up or need to come down, but we need to come to this middle ground wherever we are.
Can I tease that out a bit?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're too high, what does that mean? How does it feel? Is it that stress levels have just got a little bit too high?
Yeah, it's the anxiety. I think it's like so many athletes struggle with pre-match anxiety. If they'd like to admit it or not. I know because I've seen it and I've experienced it myself, but also I've seen it with the athletes I work with. And it's the ability to regulate themselves is super, super important, because what happens is, yes, they realize they're stressed. And then what do? We breathe high, chest and fast. And it's a constant vicious cycle of not being able to come down. And then a coach might go, take a big, deep breath. You know what it's like. And then it's like, I'm still there. So all the time it's dysfunctional when they're in that moment. And I've definitely seen it firsthand being in a changing room environment from this side from a coach's perspective now, when I'm looking at changing rooms. I'm like, how are you actually regulating yourself pre-performance to go out to be optimal from the minute one? Because we're acutely hyperventilating before games without realizing it. And I think anyone listen now, again, next time you are pre-performance, just notice where the body is, notice where the mind is, and where your heart rate is. Because what we do is we go out to warm up for 15, 20 minutes as a squad, and then we come back in, and then we spend like 5 to 7 minutes, like final preparations, final talk, and then we walk out and then play the game. Those times are not managed at all with our breath. It's completely forgot about.
So when we think about hyperventilation, sometimes people will think, okay, the athlete's going into this again, panic attack or hyperventilation attack. But that's not the case. Sure, it's not. It's just that their breathing is a bit faster, a bit harder, and a bit upper chest.
Yeah.
And for most people, they won't even notice it. But they don't realize that their body is literally telling the brain that there's a threat. So these individuals are going out onto a football field. They're supposed to perform their best, but their brain is interpreting that the body's in danger. And all the brain is here to do is really to protect the body.
Yeah.
And the brain wants them get away from the situation. So there's a mismatch there.
There is.
What you're saying is with breathing, we can bring attention even during the warm-up and interweave it into the warm-up without having to say pre-match anxiety. Like, I give you an example.
Yeah, that term's used sometimes. Yeah.
I was working with athletes, and in terms of pre-match anxiety, I had 2 individuals, and I was talking about pre-match anxiety, and said, I don't get pre-match anxiety, okay? And they often, it was almost that they said to me, well, you're kind of saying that I do get pre-match anxiety. And the next session anyway, when I was working with them, I never used the word pre-match anxiety, but I talked about flow states.
Yeah.
But in order to access flow, you have to get your autonomic nervous system into balance. A little bit of stress is good, but too much stress is bad.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing, because in order to access flow states, we also have to dampen the stress response, which in turn is we're going to be dealing with pre-match anxiety anyway.
Yeah.
In other words, we cannot access flow state if we have pre-match anxiety. But athletes, so it's coming back to, because I'm always intrigued, you're going into a group, they're highly trained individuals, They are highly paid individuals. They are at the top of their game.
Yeah.
And you're coming in to teach them breathing exercises.
Yeah, we're stripping everything back. We're starting from ground zero, literally ground zero. And I think as well, just to touch on that point, it's your terminology you use. Yeah, that's where you're going to lose someone or someone's going to jump on the bus. It's as simple as that. And I think being in the football environment previously and seeing it from a player's perspective, I think I always try and have my players' glasses on when I'm delivering. What do they need? That's how I've always tried to design my delivery, not with me in mind. Like I would never take anything personal if someone turns around and does say, I know how to breathe, I don't need your help. Fine, okay, cool. But the ones in the room will, and it's like, what did I need as a player that they now need? And it's not rocket science. You know, the world has not moved on so much that humans have evolved so much since I was playing football. It was only 5-6 years ago. So it's the same problems and it's the same issues that we need to solve. And I think for the players that I work with, it's the ability to be open-minded, I think, and the best players in the world that I've seen and worked with are the ones that are the most open-minded. They're the ones that will not shy away from trying something that might, even just might, enhance their performance, might optimize them. I think they're the ones that I love working with the most, is because they're like, Jack, tell me what to do. I'll do it. If this is gonna help, then I would be stupid not to try it. And then you get the other athletes naturally that are a little bit more closed off, need a little bit more work. And again, the terminology is really, really important of how you're delivering that information, even from a scientific level, simplifying that so they can understand it and not to bore them, you know, because for me, even, you know, the science sometimes, I have to simplify for my own sanity as well, to allow them to feel it. So I think on that side, it's the ability to be open-minded. It's the ability to walk in the room without their ego, because that's going to hold them back. And to feel, that's the buy-in. It's when they do it, they feel it, and then they go, okay, I might actually take this seriously. Mm-hmm. That's key.
So pre-match, we can prepare in terms of optimizing and balancing the autonomic nervous system, getting
Absolutely.
them out of their head, increasing blood flow, increasing oxygen delivery. There's other things opening up the airways. So we can do all of that.
Yeah, and maybe I can just... So there's one athlete, he plays in the championship in English football, and someone that I work with weekly. And the reason why I work with him weekly is because he likes to be guided. And I think athletes do. They like to be guided. And this is his dedicated space per week. Yes, he's doing his functional breathing on a daily basis, but then when he works with me, we're layering. We're going further and further and further, and he feels comfortable and safe with that. But what he's now doing is obviously bringing that into his pre-performance match day routine. But that starts the night before. Yeah, as we know. So how we're then down-regulating the body is almost like not the same concept as pre-performance, depending on where you are, but the protocols are very similar, because your body will just be in a different state when you're doing those practices. So, for example, this player pre-performance will do a round of breath holding. Of course, that's sort of like the foundations of what he does. He will then follow that with a nasal breathe in. I guess you'd call it just a mindful breath of just nasal breathing, in for 4 and out for 4. That's slow, it's soft, and it's low. Followed by more breath holds when he's walking out or when he's coming on to the pitch from being a substitute. Sometimes I see him do that as well, which is really nice. So pre-performance, we can definitely do things to get our mind and body in the right state of mind. And then obviously from a biochemical perspective as well, we're just enhancing oxygenation of the blood, and how that looks by actually, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people to understand, but increasing CO2 in the blood.
Okay, so This is becoming interesting. So we talked about pre-match and preparation, but it's happening the night before. So ultimately, we need to get a good night's sleep. Now, very often people talk about quantity, but they don't necessarily talk about quality. Do you notice many players, number one, breathing through an open mouth during sleep? Number two, having sleep disorders. Number three, waking up feeling tired. And maybe that's the player that you said that you have to upregulate. And when you said, okay, I have a group of players that when I'm working with them, the problem is that they are too sluggish and you have to upregulate them.
Yeah.
But maybe we should have stepped back 12 or 14 hours before that and got their sleep right so that they're waking up in the right frame of mind. So just a little bit about sleep and going beyond sleep hygiene. So, people talk about sleep hygiene, but I'm more concerned about we can't recover if we have an underlying sleep issue. And we're talking about insomnia. So say, for example, may a player be waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. They know there's a match going on the next day. Their mind is racing. Their mouth is open. They're breathing fast and shallow. That in turn is telling the brain that there's a threat. Are they snoring? Do any of them have sleep apnea? How do they wake up?
Yeah, this is so, it's a huge topic, obviously, like sleep is, but I think how we achieve the perfect night's sleep or optimize the sleep is sometimes like overlooked. And I think when I work with athletes and then when I'm working with the clubs,
even in your world.
Yeah, honestly, like you'd be super surprised where, some athletes wear wearable devices. So I wear a Whoop, or a lot of them wear Oura rings, of course, like these different ones, which again can track that sleep and track where they are and how they're doing things. But from just like, again, that educational perspective, breathing is not even taken into consideration, which, as you say, is absolutely crazy, especially at the highest level of performance. There are sleep coaches out there which are doing amazing work, but there's not enough of them. And I think that education per club or organization is still not there. So I always ask a group that I work with, I'm like, anyone snore in the room? And then there's a couple of lads like looking at each other like, he snores, I share rooms with him, It always creates a good laugh. And then I explain to them why they're snoring and they're like, oh yeah, that actually makes so much sense. Like, or how many times they're waking up in the middle of the night, how many times they're going to the toilet, how many times they're needing some water. Like all of these different things are just influencing that sleep cycle of 90 minutes of where they are. Are they awake? Are they in light sleep, deep sleep, or REM sleep? And for us, it's about obviously achieving that deep sleep as much as possible. And it's about promoting nasal breathing when we're sleeping. And for a lot of athletes, they don't know it. Of course, they're like, I ask them, do you breathe nasally? And they're like, I don't know, I'm asleep. So we have some like you say, we have some tests that they can not do, but just like that they can try. One obviously being myotape, right? Which I swear by as well. And it's something that a lot of athletes are now adopting. And I get messages daily, honestly, that their sleep's been deeper than ever. Or even their like respiratory rate when sleeping slows down. They're waking up feeling more refreshed. Their oral health is improved. They don't need to just glug a liter of water as soon as they wake up. Their partners are happy because they're not snoring. There's all these different things that are like influenced by it. And now they're like, where can I get this tape? Why have I never heard about it before? Now, obviously, many athletes won't mouth breathe. Many will nasal breathe.
I think it's 50%.
Yeah, I would say so. But again, I always recommend that they use the tape because then it just like counts out any chance of mouth breathing, personally. And the beauty of that the myotape is obviously we can open our mouth if we want to. And I think for me, I probably do nasal breathe when I sleep, but I still wear it. And I don't think I'll stop wearing it either because it just gives me that peace of mind. And for an athlete, that's everything. It's their psychological state and focus pre-performance. Are they doing everything that they can do to optimize preparation, to optimize performance, to optimize recovery? So they would rather just take try it because it's a peace of mind thing. They don't have to worry about that now. They know that they're going to be breathing nasally when they sleep. They know they're going to be breathing low, slow, and deep. Their respiratory rate will probably change, and they are going to be able to achieve a deeper night's sleep, which is where their pre-performance starts. And the ability to down-regulate their nervous system, like coming back to that full circle again, pre-match, pre-night, a lot of them do struggle pre-match sleep because they're just obviously locked into the game. They're already trying to sleep and they're already thinking about tomorrow and stuff like that. And that's where allowing their nervous system to be regulated. And that's where, we might very slowly, prolong the exhale just to promote a bit of deep relaxation. We might start to then bring in a box, even super simple box breathing, or the triangle breath where we're inhaling, holding, exhaling. All these different things that are just super simple and accessible will have an impact if you do them. It's as simple as that.
It must be totally frustrating because, say for example, you have a player and they have a really important match the next day, and they already know in advance, probably the day before, that their sleep is likely to be impacted. And of course, then that may follow through.
Yeah.
They have a poor sleep and they're waking up that morning and they're just feeling lousy. And there's no way you're at the top of your game. And this is really about the sleep quality versus quantity. Yeah. Of course, the dark room helps, avoiding caffeine, silence, cool. All of this is really good, but what we're looking at is the connection between our breathing and our sleep. And it also ties in what we spoke about at the start, our state of mind. So really what we want to be looking at is equipping or making somebody into almost like a performance machine, training the breath, training the brain, training the body. Now, I'm going to come back to during the match. So because people will say, well, there's no way I should be breathing through the nose during the match. And okay, that's what we need to untangle a little bit.
Yeah. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I get asked. They're like, what? So you're expecting me to breathe through my nose? I'm like, no. That's not what I said.
Yes.
There's times and places where we can incorporate nasal breathing, of course, in exercise and through the heart rate zones, in off seasons, in gym sessions, whatever it is, we can bring in that nasal breath into our lives in other ways, even if it's just going for, like I tell some of the athletes, like, you walk your dog, nasal breathe. If you're on your own, you're not talking to anyone. There's no need for your mouth to be open, But then we look at, obviously, in performance, and I say to them, look, when the ball's in play, or not just like football, this is any sport, there will be a level of like habitual breathing, of course there will. I'm not concentrating on that. There's no coach in the world, I believe, that really can influence that when a player is in their flow state. Because if they're concentrating on their breathing, they're not in their flow state. So it's for me when the ball is out of play or between points. So I think I mentioned to you before that I've been working with some athletes in table tennis for Great Britain. And one of the key things for them is between points. It's the ability to regulate themselves in the right way, to bring their heart rate down, but to also get themselves right here because they've not got long. And that's exactly the same in the football world. I think I was saying to you off air, like the stats around the ball being in play and out of play. So typically, like, there was some stats that came out last year from the EFL. I think it's 37 minutes the ball is out of play in a championship game. And plus halftime of 15 minutes. Overall, the ball's out of play more than it is in play. And a player is typically on the ball anywhere between 30 seconds and 3 minutes in a game. The other time, they're obviously running around, they're defending, they're communicating, whatever. But the pockets of time when the ball is out of play, for me, is what I concentrate on the most. And it's the same if the ball's not on the table in table tennis, because it's that regulation piece. A lot of athletes, when the ball is out of play, I always like joke with the players, like, we just pant like dogs, right? That's all we do. We just go as hard as possible and we just pant like dogs until the final whistle. And to make the right choices and decisions on the pitch is obviously a mental thing. And to have a mental recovery tool in the moment is going to be great. And that's their breath. Yes, it's a physiological recovery tool as well, of course. Like, we are trying to down regulate as fast as possible. Obviously, we're not going to be doing it to a crazy extent, but instead of taking 10 inefficient breaths through the nose that are high in chest and we're panting, of how we're actually going to regulate ourselves to slow the exhale. Yes, we might even want to offload more CO2 in the moment when that is increasing, because again, oxygen into blood to muscle in return, that's going to give off more CO2. Simple as that. And yes, that is going to rise. And yes, the urge to open the mouth is going to happen. It's inevitable. But explaining that to an athlete, again, through feeling, is great, because when we offload CO2, they can feel that immediate dampen effect of releasing that out of the body. But also regulating ourselves on the pitch in those moments where you could have 10 seconds or 2 minutes. Be the person who's recovering, right? From minute 1 to minute 90, because if we get to the back end of the game and for the last 70 minutes, for example, we've not been efficient with the way we're breathing, we're not being an efficient engine again. We're not getting the right oxygen into the blood that's going to the muscles. We're not maximizing our efficiency, which ultimately will influence your decision making as well, because of how tired we get on the pitch. So the pockets of where the ball's out of play is what I concentrate on, because I know I can't influence play as much as I wish I could. Because we're communicating constantly. Like, if you're not communicating as a footballer, you're being told off for not communicating. Mm-hmm. So it's a constant thing of mouth open, of course, just like I'm speaking now. But it's important that they are regulating themselves in the right way. And you'll see, like, I always reference like Cristiano Ronaldo. He when he takes a penalty, he does quite a famous thing where he'll inhale through his nose, and then he'll really exhale. He'll just do one breath. And it basically is like a CO2 offload, right? And everyone's saying, oh, he does it for the cameras, of course. But if you actually look at what he's doing in that moment, he's regulating himself. He's bringing himself to a calmness, because after he does that big breath, he nasally breathes. He comes back to a level of balance in the body where he's controlling his heart rate to control his mind, all by using his breath. And then he can step up to take the penalty that he's in control of. He's not panting as he's going up to take it. So he's trying to dampen his stress response as quick as possible, so he's in control. And there's all of these pockets that I think are valuable for players to try and take on, because like, no one wants to be taken off for being too tired or decision making lacking. You know,
it would be very interesting to do an experiment, is to time the length of his exhalation. But also for an athlete, so say, for example, the heart rate is ramped up to about 160 beats per minute. That's obviously too high. You're not going to have the same focus. You're not going to have the same deliverance, and you're not going to have your attention on the kick. So to bring down the heart rate, I think everybody should actually practice it. Ramp up your heart rate, then just locate your pulse at the carotid artery, just at the angle of your jaw. Experiment with your breathing and see how quickly, what's the best way to bring down your heart rate as quick as possible, maybe 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Now, I think it's going to come down to solely the speed of the exhalation. Granted, if there's air hunger there, the air hunger is a stressor. So what way would I do it? I would be taking probably, a full breath in, and then a really, really slow, relaxed, gentle breath out. The full breath in and the slow breath out is going to get rid of some air hunger. It probably will get rid of some CO2.
Yeah.
And also it's the length of that exhalation, because really what you're doing is you're signaling from the body to the brain that we're safe. Could be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm sure we'll get onto this, but some of the things that we will be doing next season, is testing certain areas, especially in with athletes, and how we can collect that data and how we can see that immediate effect. Because there's definitely times and place for obviously certain different techniques, and we're just at the start of the breathing journey in football. It really is just a start, and there's now, it's being respected and it's being listened to, and now it's like, okay, how can we optimize these athletes in performance? Because all they've got is their engine, and that's their respiratory system, and that's the thing bringing the air in and the air out. So let's optimize it as much as possible.
I'm going to come back to something else as well. So say, for example, a player that's on the ball, so this is during the game, and they have to sprint, okay? And they sprint, they get rid of the ball, but the next thing is they might have to sprint again. And they've got a very brief recovery before they sprint again. So repeated sprintability, which is a performance indicator in team sports, especially in football, but not just in football. You know, you could say it applies to boxing or MMA or pretty much any endeavor whereby there's a sprint, almost near maximum intensity, very brief recovery, and sprint again. There was a very interesting study done on similar breathing techniques to what we do, exhale, hold. And they got a group of 21 professionally trained rugby union players, and this was during peak season. So they divided them into two camps, into two groups. In one group, they had them do 40-meter sprints with a breath hold. So in other words, a breath hold after exhalation. Breathe in, breathe out, hold your nose or hold your breath and sprint for 40 meters. And there was a departure every 30 seconds. So about 7 or 8 reps per set and 2 to 3 sets per week for 4 weeks. The other group did their sprinting, which is obviously normal as part of training, with mouth open. Then they compared the difference between, they both did the same activity. The only difference was that one group held their breath while they were sprinting. The group which held their breath while they were sprinting increased their repeated sprintability from 9 reps to 14.8 reps. It was a 64% improvement in performance with young, elite, highly trained athletes. The other group, who just did their normal sprints as part of what they were normally doing as training, they had a marginal gain. Now, there's an example that, yes, sometimes we feel that what you said is during the game, you don't influence, of course, you don't want to have the player thinking about their breathing. You want the player being focused on the ball, which makes total sense. But we can actually, you can imagine in the weeks leading up to that game, we can still influence their breathing during the game, and even when they're on the ball, without them having to pay attention to it.
Absolutely, yeah, and that can be trained 1,000,000%, and that can be included in training daily, weekly, whatever it is. Of course, it's something as simple as that, and most teams now will go and train at altitude, obviously in the off seasons. And what I'm trying to tell clubs is that we can do it at sea level. We don't need to go to the mountains to do it. We can do it just as effective. That is in play, right? Or allowing them to basically do more with less at a deficit on the ball, and we can start to incorporate different breath holding routines in certain, I guess, routines on the pitch in their training sessions, but also in the gym, on treadmills, and how we test that. So yeah, I think now it's something that is becoming like that study. I love that study because it obviously resonates a lot with what I'm doing with the athletes at the moment, and there's not enough studies yet out there like that. We're going to change that next year, but I think as well, it's like shouting about that study. Not many people know about that study, and especially in professional sport, of how we can actually influence it with just the breath. We don't need like crazy machines. Most clubs have huge budgets, of course, especially in the world of football. But it's just something as simple as your breath that can have such a big influence on them. And all players do in a game is walk, jog, sprint, really. And it's a constant thing. Repeated sprints is what football is about. So I believe eventually, I'm going to say this because I believe in it, but in about 5 years' time, I think breath training will be a daily protocol for footballers, and not just footballers, but across sport, across the world at the top level. And then once it is there, because I've seen in the news recently in America, I think it was like an NFL team or something, they hired a breathwork coach to work with them. And obviously what I'm doing is a lot behind the scenes. It's not really been like known to the public that, oh, this club works with a breathwork coach, or this works with a breathing specialist or whatever you want to call it. But I definitely think in before even 5 years time, like the wave is not even here yet. And I think as soon as clubs and sports science start to understand its influence, they will be incorporating it daily. It has to happen, because it's not just running and doing a simulation of altitude training with breath holding. It's how is that actually influencing like risk of injury in the gym? How are people going into a deep squat when they're bringing on a load? How, all of these things, how are they activating this area? How are they activating the ribs? How are they loosening the ribs? How are they allowing themselves to be as efficient as possible when they breathe? Because we do like prehab in the gym, and we normally just work on obviously the primary muscle groups, the legs mainly for players. That's really it. And this area is often overlooked when activating before performance. So all of these different things are slowly coming into the game, and there's some great people out there doing some great work. But again, there's just not enough yet. But I definitely think that will become a standard practice across the board in the future.
So the area that you refer to, you're talking about the diaphragm breathing muscle, which is separating the chest from the abdomen. And we already spoke about that dysfunctional breathing from a biomechanical point of view is very common in athletes. Okay, so an athlete with dysfunctional breathing from a biomechanical point of view is breathing more in the upper chest. Now, can we look at a connection then between breathing and movement? Because you did talk about increased risk of injury, and very few people will put that link together, that it's how you breathe is going to be influencing how you move. And if you have dysfunctional movement, you've got an increased risk of injury. Can we just tease that out a little bit?
For sure.
And also, how common, again, when you see athletes, if you had 10 athletes in a room and you look at their breathing, say, for example, you're observing, are they breathing high or low?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what you would expect to see there?
Yeah, I think, again, it's person specific. Of course it is. And what their days look like, and whether if they've just come out of a stressful meeting, of course, like all these different things are going to influence where they are at that moment when I see them. But it's so common, like dysfunctional breathing. And again, the term dysfunctional breathing, people will say, well, how are you defining dysfunctional breathing? Of course, but just from an eyesight observation of what I'm looking at and what I'm seeing, you can tell when someone is under a state of fatigue, prolonged fatigue and stress, basically. And naturally what comes with that is a change in their breath and breathing rate, minute volume, and then again, acutely hyperventilating without really knowing it. And what we're doing there is, when we are constantly breathing chest and high, we're recruiting the wrong muscles at the end of the day. So other muscles have to jump in for the ones that we're not using. So a lot of the time, there's a lot of tension around this area, which is also affected by like the fascia across the body, of course, as well, and like activating that. But because we're using the wrong muscles, the primary ones that we want to use, and that they're quite weak. And what I've seen as well with athletes, and just like I think I spoke to you before about like the respiratory training that we can do in different ways, exhalation or inspiration, whatever it is. But like some athletes really struggle to exhale, like deep, like with force.
So they don't have a normal complete exhalation.
No. And it's not, their ability to actually bring air in and out is quite weak. And you can hear it by when we do certain exercises, by the way they are. And I'm like, are you trying? They're like, yeah, I'm really trying. And it's really, really interesting to see like the lack of strength in this area. And yes, they've got abdominal muscles, and we work on our core all the time, but the core is so tight and it's so clenched. And the ability to connect that movement, that synchronization with the breath and the mind, this area needs to be relaxed. For a lot of players, it's not. And they really do struggle to open up this area because, again, it's never been trained. And linking that to then risk of injury, when they're in the gym or when they're stretching, there's not one protocol that fits all, of course. Every player is different. Everyone's got a different injury history as well. But if we've got especially injuries around this area, because what players struggle with is hips, lower back, and it's the posture daily that's affecting that. And how are they, and how they're breathing.
And this is the interesting part, because when we're talking about the diaphragm, really what we're looking for is a free movement of the diaphragm.
Mm-hmm.
So during inspiration, the diaphragm is moving downwards, but during expiration, for the diaphragm to move back to its resting position. And some players, they don't have that great ability in terms of the diaphragm moving back to its resting position, which in turn is influencing the generation of intra-abdominal pressure. And in turn, for example, they don't have the same stabilization of the spine. And so 50% of people with lower back pain have dysfunctional breathing. Now, I assume there's kind of a cyclical thing there.
Yeah.
You know, the lower back pain, maybe that's what's driving the breath to the upper chest, but maybe those individuals were breathing upper chest anyway.
Yeah.
Resulting in reduced recruitment of the diaphragm, reduced generation of intra-abdominal pressure, and as a result then they didn't have that support for the spine, which brought on the lower back pain.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting, you know, when you untangle it. Okay, breathing, movement, and injury, and even the core, because I've heard some physical therapists talk about the core as a box. The inner core, you have the diaphragm as the roof, you've got the pelvic floor as the base. You've got the abs to the front, and then you've got the back muscles to the back.
Yeah.
And we have to be thinking that way.
Yeah.
But then the diaphragm just gets overlooked.
Yeah. And also like the intercostals as well. Like I think for a lot of what I've realized as well, so taking into consideration, like even just like if everyone listening now just like got their fingers and started to like massage their intercostal muscles between their ribs, you'd notice they're super sensitive. They're so sensitive, and because we never release this area of tension, and the fascia typically over that area, over the ribs, is just so tight, and that's influencing the rate of how it can expand as well. So I think like the diaphragm, yes, is obviously the main thing here, and I think a lot of people maybe just actually don't know what it does.
We don't have to think about breathing until something gets wrong. You know, like in terms of intercostals as well, I've often found the easiest way to explain it. I know it sounds a bit gross, but if you're having a barbecue and somebody hands you a bacon rib, what you're actually eating is intercostal muscles. Now everybody will know exactly what an intercostal muscle is. And
it looks exactly the same.
It is. And you know, they'll think differently of their pork ribs now the next time they start eating them. But let's move on from there. So we spoke about, during the match, and then we have to think about recovery then after the match.
Yeah.
Is recovery getting more attention now?
It is. I think I think now, like obviously the industry for recovery in general, like with wearables, but also like physical devices that we can use to recover muscles. You know, most clubs would have invested in a lot of recovery methods with machinery, with oxygenation tanks,
hyperbaric chambers.
Sorry, that's the right word. Different things like that. Like most top clubs have got this stuff, but majority have not. So recovery protocols, I do question with clubs, because it's very much like one size fits all. Of course it is. There's not enough people in a club to work one-on-one with the players' recovery protocols. But after a game, everyone does the same thing, which I think is mad. Like absolutely crazy, because we've all stepped off the pitch in a different state, physically and mentally, but we're expected to recover exactly the same. And those recovery protocols that are used in clubs, but not just I'm referencing clubs, I mean organizations, I mean sport in general. In all sports, it's one size fits all approach to most players. A lot of players that have a real bad injury history, they will get a different type of treatment typically, but overall it's a generic practice. And I think a lot of players now, like I teach yoga to athletes as well. So I do sort of not take charge, but I contribute to their recovery strategy and how we're looking at that of when in the week do we need to do this? Is it match day +1? Is it match day +2? Is it 72 hours after the game? Whatever it is. But the recovery of the nervous system is something that clubs don't take into account at the moment. So most of the time it's the physical response of the body. It's the physical recovery that's concentrated. So it's just...
What do you mean by that?
I mean recovering of the muscles.
Sure.
So I mean like wearing like a game ready machine where it's bringing pressure into the body and we're trying to flush different gases out the body or whatever it is, and trying to increase circulation of blood around the body, etc. And there's different devices and machines we use for that. But most of the time, when players step off a pitch and athletes at the top level, and I'll reference single sports for this, just to switch it up a little bit for the listeners. Most players that play single sports, it's a tournament format. So they will play round one. Let's say, okay, you've won round one. You've probably got to play round two on the same day, or it's the day after. And that recovery protocol that you take personally is obviously the only thing between the next game. So how you do that is super important. And a lot of players and coaches at the moment will just rely on the physical recovery strategies and tools, i.e. being on a bike, cycling out the legs, bit of stretching, foam rolling, and then get to bed, have a good night's sleep, and then you're ready for the next day. But I think a lot of players struggle to downregulate their nervous system. And this is the biggest thing that I've seen pre-match insomnia in most players that I've worked with. Doesn't matter win, lose, or draw. Like a striker that a table tennis player that I work with, he is, after he plays a game, he's obviously buzzing. Like if he's won, I'll get a text and happy days, and he won't mind me saying this, but he's a confidence player, just like most athletes. So after a game, he's like buzzing, and he stays in his fight or flight. Before he knew how to downregulate himself, I must add, but he will stay in his fight or flight, and then he'll come off the pitch and he'll still be over breathing, and he'll still be regulating what's happened in the game. So he'll be thinking about everything, which will be keeping him heightened, let's say. So then he'll try and sleep. Good luck. Because I remember getting into bed, and that's when you just think about the whole world. I'm thinking about my whole game. I'm thinking about what I could have done differently, what I did well, and I'm almost like my own analyst about my own performance. So I'm not going to sleep. It's as simple as that. And most players, the night of the game is where they're the most compromised, which is then going to have that prolonged effect over the week, which I'll quote, not all the time, but most of the time, there is there's a risk of performance decrease after because of their recovery. It's as simple as that. It's been compromised, and most players don't know how to regulate their nervous system. And a lot of the breathing protocols that I use with my athletes is the bit that they most enjoy, I'd say, is the downregulation, because they've never had like a sustainable way to downregulate their body and stay there. A lot of athletes use different protocols to downregulate, including tablets and sleeping tablets and stuff like that are obviously like Informed for Sport certified and approved, but still it's not a sustainable way. So retraining how they approach bedtimes is really important. And the night of the game that they've just played is the most important. That is the most crucial bit, is that first night's sleep after the game. And simple techniques that we can use to downregulate the body. Some of them like audios, I'll be honest, like some, I don't know how they're not sick of my voice yet, but some like to listen to guided audios. And I think for anyone listening that is new to this, I would say like being guided by audios is a great way to not have to think about it, but just do it as you train and get used to that and experience what breathing can do for downregulation. You know, the vagus nerve is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, totally. Oh, absolutely. And I'm a fan of guided audios, I have to say.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I recorded one, I don't know, it was about 15 years ago. And I went to a recording studio like this. And afterwards, it was on a CD. So the guy gave me a CD. So I put it into my car. And I was driving down the road, listening to it. And next thing I started falling asleep. Not quite falling asleep,
Yeah.
but I knew then there was something in it because I had to pull over, take it out, and then continue driving without it on. And absolutely, because if you wake up at say 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, there's a pressure to fall back asleep. And that very pressure to fall back asleep is going to hamper sleep. Whereas if you can hand the problem over to something else and just, okay, it's downloaded to your device is on flight mode, you just click play and you just maybe throw on a set of headphones and just relax into it. There's nothing for you to do. It takes the pressure away from you and it's kind of guided. And especially the benefit with a guided audio is that you can have it specifically scripted to induce both relaxation and also stimulating the vagus nerve. That's what we have to talk about in a second, actually. And guiding the person back and easing them back to sleep. And yeah, I think it's tremendous. Now, I'll even go as far as saying, before we met today, I listened to a 20-minute guided audio, Rest and Reset, the exact same one that I recorded 15 years ago. And I find there's 2 times to really bring in guided audios. One is during the middle of the night, and the other one is during the day as well, in terms of having that choice or that ability to do it.
Yeah, and where you are at the time, like state of mind wise.
Totally.
That's super important. And I think for players like that, most players as well, not unfortunately, but it's just the way it is, after performance, they will... they'll rely on other substances to get them to sleep, and it is a problem in the world of sport in general. I think I told you off air, like snus is quite prevalent in sport, and it's something that's just not sustainable for players to use. And now, like you say, if they can find other sustainable things that are actually going to be healthy for them long term and to retrain how they think about it, I think can make a super big impact to them, because a lot of players, they'll play a game, let's say it's a night game, or in a tournament, they'll be expected to sleep and they'll be expected to wake up at 7, 8 a.m. having 4 hours sleep and then perform the next day again. And for some players, especially like if you think like Grand Slam tennis, the best players in the world, they're not sleeping like 10 hours a night. They wish they could, but we're only human. So many stresses. They've played a 5-hour match and then they've got to actually... they've been playing at the US Open and it's been going on all night and they're playing to like 2, 3 a.m. in the morning and they're buzzing because they've just won. They can't just go to sleep with a click of a finger, and they've got to get up the next day and play again. So it's the sustainability piece of peaking your performance and staying there. That's why the recovery process is so important. And having just like 5 minutes before bed can be the difference for most people. I'm not saying you need like an hour, meditation practice. It's 5 minutes of channeling the right breath.
Yeah. The vagus nerve you mentioned. Okay, so this nerve wanders throughout the human body, hence the name vagus, and vagus means wandering, I believe, in Latin. And it's innervating the major organs, and 80 to 90% of the communication then is from the body up to the brain. And the breath is one way of being able to stimulate the vagus nerve. It releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. This in turn is causing the heart rate to slow down. Now, at the same time, there's part of the brain that was identified in 2017 that is spying on our breathing. I think it's a tremendous, when you think of the human body, okay, we have to be careful with how we breathe in any situation. I'm not saying to become obsessed with it, but maybe to look at it a different way. Because the brain is spying on our breathing, because we can stimulate the vagus nerve, we can literally convey, and you've spoken about the nervous system, and if we talk about the central nervous system, we're talking about the brain. The nervous system itself, in terms of the 2 main branches, this stress, the fight or flight response, and the rest, relaxation, we can switch it on or off just by changing breathing patterns. There must be a feeling of control when an individual learns that. And it's not just isolated to sports, but going into any meeting, any negotiation, any presentation. Because how many people, their performance has been sabotaged because the stress got in the way, not because the individuals didn't know their stuff. These people can be highly trained, and sometimes the best thing to do is to get out of our own way.
Yeah.
To put the critical mind aside, because the critical mind is too slow. So do any of your athletes give you that feedback, or how do you think yourself, knowing that you have a tool that you can use on demand that's there, nothing for you to pay, all you have to do is have a basic understanding, and in actual fact you could teach an individual how to do this in a half an hour.
Yeah, and I think that's why that's the beauty of it. And I think for me, the reason why I do what I do, like anything, it came from personal experience. And I think after football, I was put in certain situations under pressure and different things where I had to, without even realizing it, I was trying to regulate myself, but I didn't really know how to. And I think having that tool in your locker, like in your box, I think for a lot of players, even now, like most players, they do stuff off the pitch. So a few of my clients that I work with have come like really close friends, because we're not just talking about football now. We're talking about life. We're talking about lifestyle. We're talking about what they're doing off the pitch, their families, their friends, their kids, what ventures they've got going on. And a lot of them now are starting to do more podcasts. They're starting to speak in front of people. They're trying to raise money for their business venture, or they're now shooting content on social media and all these different things that you can tell when someone's nervous. It's as simple as that. And I've had to channel that myself, and I'm sure you have when you speak at these amazing, big conferences. It's having a tool that you can rely on. And it comes back to what we were saying at the start of the conversation about your relationship with your own breath. It's as simple as that. And it's not rocket science. You don't need to do these huge techniques that you see on social media to feel the impact of it. Less is more most of the time, especially with how we breathe. And I think that's what needs to be communicated more of, because you look at the best people in the world and presenting, or the media, or keynote speeches, they're in control. Notice the way they're breathing. Notice how subtle they speak. Notice there isn't a in the breath, because that gives confidence to the listener that they're in control. Okay, I'm relaxed as well. It's the people you're dealing with as well, which is super, super important. And I think I remember like the first workshop I ever delivered to a bunch of athletes, I was a nervous wreck, and I can feel my heart rate going, and I can feel like this tension built in the body. And I was like, I've just got to go to the toilet. Like, it'll be 5 minutes. I didn't need to go to the toilet.
Yeah.
I need to regulate myself. So having those skills is fantastic. And what's your experience with that personally? Like, I'm sure that's helped you lots over the years.
Yeah, many times. I wasn't naturally good at talking. I'm quite an introvert, to be honest with you. I love talking about what I do, but I didn't always find it came easy to me. I think it comes things do become easier with experience, with not the knowledge that you accrue. But, I remember maybe going back, say, 10 years ago, I could do a presentation and it would go absolutely really well. I was very happy with it. I got into that flow state, even though, I might necessarily have had a PowerPoint presentation, but I was able to bring myself fully into what I was doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was one. But then I could do a presentation or a talk the following day or a week later, and it wouldn't go that way. And then I kept on wondering, well, why can't I be consistent with this? How come one day it goes really well and the other day it's a mess? And it wouldn't have been a mess, but when you're not at your A game, and you kind of struggle a little bit. You can get what you want to get. You can get it across, but you don't have that sense of satisfaction at the end of it.
Yeah.
Because this zone, the flow state that we talk about, and I know it was a Hungarian individual that coined that back in the 1970s, Csikszentmihalyi. And, people talk about flow state, but they don't always consider what are the ingredients that we need to access that flow state. And we've discussed all of them here, by the way. One is concentration. And then you have to say, well, what's concentration but your ability to hold your attention on one thing? Attention span, the length of time that you can hold your attention on one thing. the autonomic nervous system must come in, because anxiety is the greatest sabotage of flow. That's straight off. And of course, you have to have mastery over what you're doing. You want a certain amount of pressure, not too little that it bores the life out of you, but not too much either that it scares the life out of you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to come to full circle then. So after that, then you kind of, for me, it's always a bit of an experiment. And I'm trying to figure out how come that day went really well and how come this day didn't go so well. So then I brought in a routine. Number one is, if I had a talk at 1 o'clock in the day, I don't turn up at the event up until maybe 12:30, because I want to conserve every bit of energy for that talk.
Okay.
I have limited energy, and I think we all have limited energy. And if I feel drained, that impacts me. But I'll use those 3 hours, or it might be an hour, whatever, and I'll spend quite a bit of time just sitting there, bringing my attention inwards. I typically close my eyes. I direct my attention towards the back of the brain. I get my attention out of the front part of the brain, which is the thinking mind. So I put the thoughts aside, bring my attention onto the breath, and then I start slowing down everything. So for me, it's very often that, I'm already upregulated enough because that's slight stress response going into it.
Yeah.
I want to downregulate at that point. And then what I will do is I will do some physical movement. I may do some breath holds, but I will do enough then just to get the circulation going.
Yeah.
And before I go out on stage, I want to walk out on stage with every cell of my body. So I have my attention dispersed throughout my body. I'm walking out and I'm not going to talk from my head, but I'm going to talk with all of my attention dispersed throughout the body, with my attention fully there. And, it's helped. And it's like, I'll give you one example. I had a talk in Copenhagen and it was for 7 hours. Okay, I had a break every hour for about 10 minutes to 400 people without PowerPoint presentations. So I spoke from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 p.m. that evening. And I spoke on topics, all breathing, for 7 hours, pretty much straight. But see, this is coming back to, remember we talked about, if you have something you can fall back on, you're willing to take on a challenge because you know that your physiology isn't going to let you down.
Yes.
But I suppose the key thing here is to realize, start off with small situations and build up your experience with it. And even say, for example, if you're an athlete, you never want to go in terms of, you want to become very comfortable with what you're doing. You want to be able to bring breathing into that, it's seamlessly integrated into what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you have to be thinking about your breathing outside of that. So now I'm going to go in terms of an athlete. Okay, so we talked about the match, but really what we're thinking about and talking about here is, the match is one thing, but we really have to be thinking about where can we bring breathing outside of the match.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I'll pass that to you.
The match is the last place, really. Like, everything we do leading up to the match will influence the match. It's as simple as that. And players want to be consistent in all walks of life. So players love routine. Okay, so most players will have a set routine daily because they know what time they're going into football, they know what time they're training, they know what time they're going to eat and what they're going to eat, and they know what time they're going to go home. So most of their life is really structured. So this is why it's even easier for them to do it. And this is why I'm so sort of like enthusiastic with players or athletes doing it, is because they live structured lives. It's quite seamlessly to integrate that into that. I think you look at the corporate setting, for example, it's not as consistent and it's chaotic. And people are like, well, I've not got time to do that and I've not got time to do it. Athletes have got time. Athletes have got time to be with their own breath. Athletes have got time to be, of course, in their mind, but most athletes want to be consistent from a physical perspective and a psychological perspective. And how are they going to achieve that throughout the year, well, the week leading up to the game? It's the regulation piece. So number one is regulation for consistency of their mind and body and to be at balance. So again, coming back to the autonomic nervous system, where is that on a daily basis? I would say to the players, like, when you're not training, you need to be recovering. It's as simple as that. You need to be relaxing. And for a lot of them, they just take that from a physical perspective. So they go, well, I'm chilling at home. Yeah, and where's the mind? Where's the breath at that point? What other factors in your lifestyle are influencing your nervous system? Because there a lot are, and yeah, some things we can't. We can't help. We're going to have different altercations in life and different things that happen on a daily basis, but the ability to regulate themselves so they stay down is really important. A lot of players now obviously have families and kids, and sleep's compromised even more. And they go to me, well, Jack, I can't sleep for 8 hours. I'm like, that's fine, right? We do what we can do. This is real life. You might have to sleep for 5 hours, but make sure those 5 hours are optimal. Make sure that you're doing everything in your power to make sure they are okay. And then when you're awake, you're breathing functionally. It's as simple as that. Then you look at the layer 2 when we think about the foundation of breathing. Okay, great. Then we can add the layer 2 of like breath training and how we're going to influence. And that's just not at the elite level. That's every level of, that's someone that's just about to do a couch to 5K or anything. Like, we can add a level of breath training that sits alongside your gym sessions, that sits alongside your Saturday run club or whatever it is, to ultimately increase your chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide, to increase your relationship with the breath, to understand that you are okay being uncomfortable. When the breath is out of your control, what can we do to regain control? So we can regain control here. And all these different things then add to your decision making if you are playing a team sport or a sport that needs, you might need to hit a ball or make a decision or a shot. It's going to be influenced by where your mind is in that moment. So that regulation piece with breath training is super, super important. Then looking at layer 3, which is like, again, more technical and a little bit more specific to the individual around, the muscle training of the body, but also then off season for players, simulation of altitude training when they've got a little bit more time to do it and to adopt it, because there's nothing on the line in the off season. A lot of players, if I was to come in and deliver something, they'll be like, well, I've got my routine, I'll try it, but I'll see you next year. I'm like, that's fine. A lot of them already are like, well, what are we doing in the off season? Because they've never got more time to sort of like rewire everything from the start. And then when they go back to their preseason training and testing, they're already one step ahead. Because when we do our preseason testing, most athletes, well, especially in team sports, it's the dread of preseason testing. No one likes preseason testing. If you do, then I need to meet you, because there's not many of you out there that like putting their body under that much pain. Basically, and it's a dread, because you're like, oh, have I done enough in the off season? Have I done enough here? And I think with players, it's like silencing as much doubt in the mind as possible, knowing that they've done everything that they can to optimize their performance. There's times for players to relax, of course, and have blowouts in the off season. Of course, we all need it. But then it's like, well, okay, cool. A month before they go back to their team and start their preseason testing, their preseason starts, where they can now start to integrate the foundations of nasal breathing on a run, going through the heart rate zones. Okay, I can currently nasal breathe until zone 2, okay, or zone 3. Okay, can we increase that to zone 4? Can we bring in a level of load into the body, but feel comfortable doing it and getting used to that? And by the time they go back, they know, like I think I said to you off air as well, like one of my friends, he's a professional footballer who plays in League One, and I did some work with him in the off season, and it's the ability, like psychologically, to know that you've got more in your locker. I think it's really important for players, especially when they're under a certain load and they're going through different testing. It's like he started nasal breathing in the running he was doing, and yes, eventually, because of the level of CO2 generating in the blood and coming out, he did obviously go to mouth exhale, but he never actually got to the point where he needed to mouth breathe. It was nasal in, exhale mouth. And he was always felt like then he was like, and I felt like I had another layer, because I could have gone to mouth breathing right at the end, but I didn't even need to. And he felt in control doing that. So I think that is really important as well, to like layer the foundations on top of each other. And then eventually that just brings in a resilient breather within exercise, not just here at rest, because most athletes will question, well, what we're doing right now is at rest. How is this going to influence me in performance? And it's like, get this layer first. I know you're a functional breather. Great. And then what can we add to that to maximize your output in training, but then ultimately in the game where the game is won or lost, basically. So hopefully that's answered your question there.
I'm just thinking about off season. I think it's a great point. Introduce something new. There's no risk. And yet there's a pressure when the player goes back that they're able to meet those targets. Possibly it's a good role to bring in breath holding during jogging. And the only reason I'm thinking about here is, stimulating anaerobic glycolysis, where you're pushing the body into that oxygen debt.
Yes.
To cause the body to make adaptations so that you can delay lactic acid, say, for example. And in order to do that, to cause that adaptation, the objective is to lower oxygen.
Yeah.
Now, we could get an individual off season and we could have the individual in his sitting room, for example, or her sitting room. Breathe in and out through your nose, pinch your nose and hold, and jog, holding the breath, and increase the intensity slightly, increase it then, and keep relaxing into the air hunger and keep going until a moderate to strong air hunger. Then let go, breathe in through your nose, get your breathing under control, repeat it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
That will lower their blood oxygen saturation, much stronger than a sprint.
Yes.
So we're able to lower it down to 85% SpO2. That's the target. We're also increasing carbon dioxide. You mentioned about increasing carbon dioxide tolerance. And we can do that. And this would be an exercise or a routine that takes about 10 minutes. And it could be practiced every second day. And as opposed to the trauma of having to sprint to stimulate anaerobic glycolysis, which could possibly increase the risk of injury, an individual can do it and they can get similar gains in terms of being able to delay lactic acid and fatigue. Now, you talked about, say, for example, in the gym, and I'm not sure was your point, was it to bring breathing into the gym? So in other words, if you're on a treadmill, is that a place that you can bring in breathing? But is it also a place to be able to train the brain?
Yeah, I think both. And I think just on the point of like the breath holding just before that as well, the reason why it's accessible is like injured players can do it. So they're not falling behind. So like I've worked with some players before that are returning back from like serious like ACL injuries and knee injuries, etc. And they wanted to start to bring like breath training into their prehab and rehab leading up to then going back into on the pitch stuff. So it doesn't come to them as such a shock when they're there, which happens quite a lot because when a player is injured, the last thing that they are training is their breath at the moment. And that's their only engine. It's like not turning your car on for 6 months. The battery's going to die. It's as simple as that. And when you turn it on, it's going to smoke,
Yes.
and that's how I try and explain it to them. So I think on that side, it's really accessible for that reason, is you don't need to be fully fit to do it, which I think is really effective. And then going on to the gym environment, I think there's a couple of things there. It's for the average gym goer, like how can you now start to bring in breath training into your treadmill workouts? Because treadmills are used a lot in gyms, right? Especially the weather. And what I was saying to you today, I'm not running in Galway today because all it's done is rain. And I would probably, hate to admit this, probably go to the gym and do a treadmill workout. And it's like, well, okay, what can I do? All right, well, the average gym goer or someone that wants to improve their 5K times, for example, and they might be going on the treadmill to do interval training. Well, you start by walking, you nasally breathe. They've probably got a watch on of some sort. So you're probably going to track your heart rate zones. I suggest looking at that whilst you're running, okay, to understand where your heart rate zone is right now. And when you increase that, what's that doing to the breath? And can I hold a nasal breath in the warm-up? Can I be in control of it from the start, regulating myself mentally as well as physically? And then within the running that I'm doing, you'll notice that obviously naturally when your heart rate goes up and you go through your zones, your breath will change. Of course it will. But you can bring in a level of breath training to that where, maybe you don't need to go to zone 5, but we can stay nasally breathing in zone 3 or 4 for a little bit longer. So we can we can prepare, we can allow the body to get used to that environment. And then when you go to zone 5 and you will open your mouth on the exhale, for me, it feels a lot easier. It feels like I've got another gear, which I think is really important. And yeah, I've been having a few conversations recently with some people in High Rocks. You know, have you heard of High Rocks?
No.
It's like it's a functional fitness competition where you do like a 1 kilometer run and then you do like an exercise. So you do a 1K run as fast as you can, and then you'll do like a 1K row, and then a 1K run, a 1K ski erg, 1K run, wall balls they're called, and different things like that. And your heart rate's constantly going like this. And everyone's trying to maximize their time, and everyone's really trying to like bring their times down in their scores. And I say to a lot of them, I'm like, well, how are you running? Because the way you run is going to prepare you for the exercise that you do after. And the way you're breathing in that run is going to determine where your heart rate zone is by the time you then get onto the row and do the row. So I think from a functional breathing perspective, everyone can bring that into their game. I think for a lot of people, what they do struggle with, and you'll probably agree with me, is it's the transition between, like, if they are a chronic mouth breather and they're used to that, just nasal breathing whilst walking is tough. It really is tough for some because of just their sensitivity. So I think it's like a gradual road to get in there, where you might just inhale through the nose and exhale out the mouth from the start, because we can't expect everyone just to go from mouth to nose overnight. It is a process. And then I think the other area is we come back to risk of injury, and we look at like how we are inflating this area to protect the spine. I think super important as well. So like how we're lifting in the gym, even just like tongue placement in the mouth, and we're coming back to posture and everything like that, and the jaw is inflating as you take on the load to protect the body and to protect the spine. And a lot of players are now incorporating, not just players, but athletes in general are incorporating that in the way that they breathe into certain movements to ultimately maybe get more range. So if it's into stretches or even just like twisting of the spine, etc., or to take on load in a strength-based exercise, which is super simple.
So I'm just thinking about nasal breathing. We might have some individual, I don't wear trackers. I have no technology. I'm just, but how about the rate of perceived exertion and using, say, for example, continuing to do physical exercise with the mouth closed, but if they find that their breathing is getting a little bit too uncomfortable, if the air hunger is getting too strong, then either to slow down, which I would say to a recreational athlete, absolutely do, and do everything with your mouth closed. Or with an elite athlete, of course, they're going to go through, once the air hunger gets too much, they're going to switch from nose to maybe in through the nose and out through the mouth to get rid of some air hunger. And then if the intensity, if they ramp it up again, it might be mouth. So just a little bit about that, the rate of perceived, because I think sometimes there's kind of an idea that we're all about nasal breathing. Even if you're sprinting, it should be in and out through the nose. But no, we are realistic as well.
Yeah. I think that's, especially to a recreational athlete, that is really key to understand. Like, we're not up here on our high horses going, I nasal breathe and that's all I do. And everyone's got a different capacity and a different physiological starting point of where they are in their journey with exercise in general. And again, what are their underlying conditions, because that's obviously going to influence the way that they're breathing on a daily basis and how they breathe in exercise, basically. So I think for that perspective, so for example, like I host a run club where I'm from, and we get together, and it's just all recreational athletes from the area, and everyone's different backgrounds, shapes and sizes, and it's great because everyone's just at their own level and pace. And when they start to question, oh, Jack, what should I do with this breath and stuff like that, and for them, I'm always like, slow down and be in control rather than speed up and be out of control, because you've probably heard the term anyway, like. To run fast, you've got to run slower. and for longer, basically, in the sense of like your foundations of your endurance. And for me, that's the same with nasal breathing, and how they're going to actually do that is their heart rate zones. If you do wear a tracker, you'll notice, for example, on a Whoop band, there's your different zones. And I remember when I started my nasal breathing journey in exercise, I could probably hit zone 3, which was 150 beats per minute, probably 150 to 160 beats per minute. And then I'd need to open my mouth. And I was like, now I'm fortunate I can go to like zone 4 and 5 nasally, but that's a journey that I've took. Like, it's not happened overnight. And I think for a lot of people, we can start walking. We can start when they're walking the dog. Nasal breathing in itself will improve your chemosensitivity to CO2. You don't need to breath hold all the time. And I think for those that are struggling with that concept, if you are used to just mouth breathing, nasal breathing will give you enough of a benefit and an effect in everything that you're doing. And then on the athletic perspective, they obviously can't afford to slow down because they're in a game or they're in training, or they're not going to slow down and say, hey, coach, I need to bring my heart rate down because I'm only nasal breathing today. No, it's not going to happen. So it's then about managing when we do spike and we do go above our heart rate zones that we can control a nasal breath. It's how are we breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth? It's how we breathe in through the mouth, because there's different ways of breathing through the mouth even. So again, it's being used to that, but also still being in control mentally when we do need to go mouth, or when we are sprinting and we've got to do 5 sprints back and forward to recover, and phases of play change. That's where, even though, yes, we're not always saying nasal breathing, where however you're breathing, as long as you're like, there's a control in doing it is the most important thing, I would say.
And I suppose the factors, like I'm looking at your nasal airway and it's really good.
Thank you.
In comparison to mine, I'm totally envious of you. So I've got a deviated septum, compromised nasal airway.
You're making me blush, Patrick. You're making me blush.
And this was years of mouth breathing as a kid, of course. You've got a high palate. The palate is infringing on the septum. The septum is off. So for me, I have to use a nasal dilator.
Yes. Yeah.
So one is our airway, another is bolt, and the other then is adaptation. So when you talked about, you might start off, you're breathing in and out through your nose during exercise, and then over time, a few weeks, you reduce the chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide, you help strengthen the diaphragm, you also improve the range because you're breathing through your nose, which is adding an extra load onto the breathing muscle. Your body adapts and then it's easier to sustain it. And I'll just kind of briefly say some of the benefits, because I'm just conscious that maybe we've been talking about nasal breathing and we haven't been talking about what it does. It improves your blood circulation throughout the body.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the biggest ones. It also increases oxygen delivery throughout the body and to the working muscles. So recovery post-physical exercise is better. It's an extra load. So that's why initially it's a bit stronger. It's a bit tougher.
Yeah.
But this is good because then your body adapts to it. I had an interview or a podcast with Dr. George Dallam, Dallam, and he's just published a paper, and he looked at fibrosing of the heart in endurance athletes.
Okay.
So basically individuals who are doing long stints and long distances of running, and of course they're normally breathing in and out through the mouth. And when we are breathing in and out through the mouth, there could be a risk that we're blowing off too much carbon dioxide, and as a result then blood vessels are constricting. So the individual is doing a long distance running, they're mouth breathing all that time, they're putting their heart and really working their heart because of the increased metabolic demands, but at the same time there's reduced blood flow and oxygen delivery to the heart.
Yes.
And his hypothesis is now, and when I say hypothesis, it's a theory, but we have to bear in mind he's in this space for 20 years. He's just looking at normal physiology, So if an athlete then switched to nasal breathing during running, by breathing in and out through their nose, during running they're producing a lot more carbon dioxide, but because their mouth is closed, the carbon dioxide then is going to accumulate a little bit more in the lungs, and in turn increase carbon dioxide in the blood leaving the lungs, which is causing vasodilation. So the brain is getting more blood flow. but the heart is getting more blood flow. So even from a safety point of view, and there's so many benefits to nose breathing during exercise that the mouth just does not do.
Yeah, and I think from that as well, like from the athletic performance perspective, it comes back to just like daily protocols of training, but it's the same with like the average gym goer. It's the same concept and thing. Like what we're doing with the athletes is just like a heightened or like a one level above what I would do with the general population, because their capacity is different. They're used to being under so much pressure. They're used to being like battered daily, you know, in the sense of like they're used to running hard. They're used to their respiratory rate being so high. They're used to fatigue and stuff like that. So I know I can trust that they can cope with a certain amount of demand from me as well. But it's then again having the ability to control that and to bring ourselves up and bring ourselves down and constantly do this is a skill, and it all comes from how we're breathing on a daily basis. And nasal breathing is the foundation of functional breathing, in the sense of the way I'm teaching it with the athletes, or like getting them to buy in. Nasal breathing is enough for them to see a benefit. Mm-hmm. If they are a chronic mouth breather daily, that will be enough for them to see the difference. And especially the recovery piece. So even with, like you say, recreational athletes, it's just try nasal breathing after your next run. Don't concentrate on the breathing in the run. Just breathe how you would normally breathe, because that might be enough for you anyway. Just breathe nasally after the run and notice how you feel and how quick that adaptation happens. Because everyone that I've spoke to or worked with or like told them to do such, if they can obviously cope with that demand, again, from a CO2 sensitivity perspective, they're recovering quicker.
So what you're saying is do the run with your mouth closed?
Well,
or,
in the sense of the
or
run,
afterwards?
I'm saying afterwards, because sometimes, obviously, yeah, ideally I would love us all to be running nasally.
Sure.
But for some people that are struggling with that because they're just not used to it. And they might say, well, Jack, I can't even run. I need to walk. Like, I can't even jog with my mouth closed. Okay, fine. Do what you've got to do. Run however you've got to run. But I'm saying after you stop running, just breathe nasally. That might be enough for someone to go, I can see the benefits.
There's something in here.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's the beauty of it. It's like, it's the small, simple steps that we can take. Doesn't have to be complicated to achieve an effect for better on the body.
Yeah. Oh, totally. You're doing some research, or you've got a collaborative team, and there's quite some exciting research that's going to be happening. Can you talk about it, or
yeah, of course. No,
it's all under wraps, is it?
Yeah, a bit of both. No, I'll give you some nuggets. I'll give you some bits. Yeah, so I'm really fortunate enough to work with two like exceptional individuals in their space.
And they're in what? They're in the Premiership.
Yeah, so one works as a performance psychologist for a first team in the Championship. And then one is a functional medicine doctor who's also worked in sport for quite a long time as well. And what we're doing now from a research perspective is testing athletes. We're looking at respiratory health. We're looking at the influence of breathing practices on their physical and mental performance, basically. So the reason why we are sort of creating this 360 team is so we've got all areas covered, because I'm not a sports psychologist and I'm definitely not a doctor. So in the sense of like creating that environment where we can look at all of these different areas, and we've got different data points that we can pull out of athletes when we test them, etc., from a qualitative and a quantitative approach, to ultimately try and fast forward the adoption of breathing practices in sport. That's the aim here. And yeah, through Optima Performance, we created our research institute maybe about 4 months ago now. We've got some exciting partnerships with some universities that are sort of like on the horizon. And we also have research fellows and PhD students working with us now. Great. So we're trying to create this ecosystem and community of people that are really interested in the space. And I think the buy-in and the influence across the whole breathwork or breathing practice industry in general is, for me, I want to influence the top. If we can influence the top, it's just going to filter down, and everyone's going to look at the top and go, well, wow, what are they doing? I want to do that. And if I know my favorite athlete in the world is doing these practices, that's going to inspire me to try it. And I think the earlier the generations know about this, the better. So I think one of the main areas, to be fair, for us to research and the outcome of what we're trying to achieve, obviously a lot of the things we're trying to test, we don't know what the outcomes are going to be yet. That's the beauty of it, I guess. But it's just to make it as accessible and influence breathing as a practice in professional sport settings, and for it to be respected, because like I said previously, I think eventually it's going to have its own department. So that's what we're trying to justify and prove with the likes of yourself and the different practices that we do at OA as well. And yeah, we've got some really exciting partnerships with, for example, like professional clubs and industry, like organizations and governing bodies to allow this work to be sort of like ethics approved and past that side of things, and really try and grow this as a respected practice that can actually enhance sports performance. Because I think all of the work that you do at Oxygen Advantage is obviously change the breathing game, especially in performance. So I can only thank you for that, really, probably on behalf of every OA instructor. And I think allowing your practices and different methods to be, again, tested and justified at the top level will only help the whole industry. So yeah, that's what we're doing. I can't really tell you much more than that, I don't think, but yeah, hopefully that's giving you a snippet on what's to come with Optima Performance and what we're trying to build, and looking at, you know, breathing as a performance tool to enhance performance, but also then well-being on an athlete and what we go through. And yeah, I speak on behalf of probably all the athletes in the world that will listen to this. If you've played at any sort of level, you know the pressure physically and mentally what comes with any sport that you're involved in. And I think sometimes, most of the time, it takes its toll on a lot of people, and we don't still have the recovery tools personally inside us or the knowledge to manage that. It's always external. And I think if we can educate people on what we can use internally, I think that that's going to be probably one of the most powerful tools any individual can know. And yes, it comes back to, you know, the power of knowing self and mindfulness and all these different practices that we can achieve, but we can use our breath as the anchor for that and the starting point. So that's definitely something that's motivated me to do what I do, and try and now bring this into the industry and yeah, hopefully make a good impact on it.
I think it could have a significant impact. I've seen breathing for many, many years, and it's almost that you're bringing a totally new modality into the area of sports. And of course, there's going to be people, early adopters, who are going to start off straight off with it, and they're going to see changes and benefits. They're not guinea pigs. We have been in the space. Yeah. We know the physiology. And it's really exciting because it's kind of opening up a whole new tier. And I think it's actually timely, because if you think of, okay, you would have had your pressures, but I think athletes are having so much pressures. Young people have so much pressures driven by the technology. And it's almost that you need something to help counter the technology and the world that we're living in today. And breathing training and understanding all of the stuff that you discussed could be a tremendous, and it's not just for the sports, it's for all areas for life, and it's for life. Yeah.
It's not, doesn't just stop like after a training session or something like this. This is a lifestyle choice. This is what it is, really. Like, you can, well, one of the biggest things I've noticed, even with like some of the athletes that I work with on a one-to-one basis, is just like their level of like calmness that's brought to them. Just by, I've got one player that I work with. He's out in Belgium. He plays in their their Premier League out in Belgium, and he's someone that I won't say his name, but he won't mind me saying this. He's someone that struggles with anxiety and panic attacks, right? And forget performance, like forget all of that. Just quality of life and well-being and his own mental health and like how he's managing himself, seeing that improvement. It's like, because as soon as players or athletes leave their sport daily or go home, typically they're on their own, left to their own devices. And that's where a lot of players struggle, because they've gone from structure to no structure in space of an hour, right? And just giving them those like pockets of tools that they can do in certain moments, or when the heat's on, or one of them, like when he drives, he gets super anxious and stressed. And it's like, okay, well, how are you breathing when you're driving? You know, all these different things that can help you on a daily basis. So I think that definitely is a great reward for me, that I can help them on that just foundational level of just managing life, because it does get a lot. I think I was talking to you off air as well about like the amount of travel that you've done, and even what I've done recently, and like going around doing conferences or talks or delivering presentations and workshops, and travel takes its toll on me, let alone travel on a footballer or an athlete that has to travel the world. So giving these tools, I think, is an absolute game changer, and something that is super inspiring that we can help them with, and it motivates me to keep doing what I'm doing and grow in the space, because the ability, even like in the off season, athletes want a release, so they do all sorts. We go on holiday, they go drinking, they do this, they do that. Great, fine, go and do your thing. And then there's like this pocket of time where they're like, okay, now I need to think about life and sport, and I need to get myself optimal again. So for example, this summer, like I'm bringing together like 20 athletes where we're doing like an Optima retreat day, where it's going to sort of incorporate 4 pillars, which again allows them to experience the benefits of what we're doing. So we're going to activate them, we're going to release them, we're going to meditate, and then we're going to recover, to bring them up and down on this journey, but in a controlled way where they can explore their mind and body further. Because a lot of athletes now are starting to be a lot more open-minded to things that are going to sustainably benefit them, not just short-term wins. So I think that education is key, and creating those spaces is really cool, because I love what I do for that reason, basically. So
Some take-homes for somebody listening, what would you suggest?
I think for any aspiring athlete out there, I would say one of the biggest things that I've noticed when I work with some of the best athletes in the world is the ability to be open-minded and leave your ego at the door when learning a new skill is key, because you'll get in your own way, like you were saying earlier about in your mind. So leave your ego at the door and be open-minded when adopting breathing as a practice and as a lifestyle. Try it, feel it, then you can tell me it doesn't work. That's fine for you, but try it and feel it first. I would say for any recreational athlete or listener out there that has always thought like, what do the best in the world do? They're doing it. You just don't realize it yet. They are doing it. It is out there. We are doing it with them. And the ability to find a 1% marginal gain, it could be within you already. You just don't know it yet.
Great. Pleasure, Jack. And Optima is your business, or sorry?
Yeah. So Optima Performance, recently rebranded. It was Optima Yoga because it was just me. But now it's Optima Performance. Our website literally went live yesterday, the time of recording this. And we're sort of trying to innovate in this space and work alongside amazing partners like yourself. And we're bringing on more people all the time, especially in the research department, that are interested in this field. So if there's anyone out there that wants to know more about research in this area, feel free to reach out. We always see it as a collaborative approach within this industry. Optima is something that I've been growing for a year full time. I left my corporate world to pursue this, but it's been something that's always been a dream, and yeah, it's great that I get to do it daily, and yeah, I'm blessed for that. So again, thank you for having me on. I really do appreciate everything, and thank you for hosting me. It's been
Pleasure.
great.
Thanks very much, Jack.
Cheers. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you for listening to the Oxygen Advantage podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and maybe take the time to leave us a review. The Oxygen Advantage podcast is available from all your podcast providers.